So the point of this video is to focus again on filmmaking, and in particular on documentaries and fake mockumentaries, as these are extremely interesting formats of conveying messages to viewers. I find them interesting because they often undermine the literal truth to present a more everlasting truth. So in this video, I'm going to concentrate on satire and parody, as well as the role it plays in filmmaking. A few weeks ago, I went over mockumentaries, and this time I'm going to focus on a very closely related subject, fake mockumentaries, but using two particular recent examples, Death to 2020 and No Men Beyond This Point. So you probably already know that the very point of using a format of a mockumentary is that while the film itself tends to be at least partially based on fictional events, it also tends to reveal the truth about the subject matter. So for example, Modern Family focuses on the life of a fictional family to reveal and to allow us to laugh at the real and relatable problems that they face. Essentially, it allows mockumentary makers a bit of an escape. They cannot really be accused of falsehood or misinformation. The format of the film itself disclaims any such criticisms. So this makes mockumentaries potentially the best vehicle to expose the unstated, implicit cultural and societal standards that we entertain sometimes without critically examining them.
He flew back to the White House and stood on the balcony and took his mask off, so we'd know it was actually him and not a beautiful woman in disguise. Then he proved both his thumbs still worked.
You probably have already seen the first type of a mockumentary, the generic amusing sitcom, where the camera follows key characters, both characters and the commentary is fictional, and the classic documentary format is not essential for that type of production. Yes, there are interviews and yes, the camera shake is present, but these productions do not claim to present an objective view of any particular issue. Now, the second less discussed, but perhaps more powerful version of a mockumentary is the fake documentary. A fake documentary relies heavily on disingenuousness, a bit of humor, and other formal devices to create this iconic comic distance between itself and the documentary's alleged truth-telling capacity. But documentary remains seen as fiction, as a result of which its essence tilts towards parody more than your standard sitcom mockumentary such as The Office or Modern Family. So these are all the reasons why a fake documentary is a very special format and one that is sadly not often discussed. So let's look at what we can learn about it from Death to 2020, a recent Netflix production, and No Men Beyond This Point, a documedy that you can probably still find on Amazon Prime. These two films are similar in many respects, mostly in that they openly adopt the documentary format, but they end up serving very different purposes and they have different impact on viewers. So let's see why.
It was quite remarkable, really. One of the most iconic moments in history that any of us will live through, but also deeply, profoundly stupid. The history books covering this period will have to be written in crayon.
Death to 2020 was released in December 2020, and it uses historical footage and fictional characters to comment on the COVID-19 pandemic in the US and other political events that were unfolding at that time. The basic gist of the film is that it narrates the events of the year with Samuel L. Jackson, Lisa Kudrow, and Hugh Grant playing expert talking heads. Meanwhile, No Men Beyond This Point is what would be described as a science fiction mockumentary. What do I mean by this? I mean that it entertains the idea that somewhere in 1950s, women became able to reproduce without men, and tells the story of the aftermath. At the same time, because it adopts the format of a documentary, it uses the classic moves such as interviews and experts and historical footage and dramatization to get its points across.
Richard, he was my husband. He insisted that I get retested because he knew the same thing I did. We hadn't been intimate for over a year.
Of these films undermine the truth-telling format and parody the documentary format in an active way. Documentaries are often seen as films that are uniquely suited to reveal certainty and facts or expose misconceptions and lies that we are prone to believe for whatever reason. There seems to be an influx of documentaries about food, the environment, and they appear to be made with the intention to bring awareness of certain issues to the public. A fake documentary, at its core, relies heavily on using conventions of a documentary to undermine the format of a documentary and question its truth-telling capabilities.
Here we have the major developed countries that existed at that time.
What's interesting is that governments all over the world, with every different kind of political structure, remember this was before unification, when faced with fatherless pregnancy claims, they all reacted the exact same way.
So by focusing on absurd and impossible topics such as manlessness and its societal impact, No Men Beyond This Point exposes the fact that many documentaries are presented to deceive without outright lying. That the makers often try to influence our moral and societal judgments while attempting to present themselves as objective and detached.
Which is why we think it's best for the population as a whole, and for young people especially, to prohibit opposite-sex unions and to encourage all the remaining men to go into the sanctuaries, so we can focus on the next stage of our evolution without any unnecessary distractions or confusion.
Essentially, fake documentaries exaggerate the formal devices of a documentary and use absurd to expose us to these biases. After all, documentaries can also be prone to fabrications, while we are prone to accepting them at face value. Fake documentaries clearly illustrate the connection between objective representation of facts, or lack of thereof, the power held by those who share information from a point of authority. Essentially, they educate us. These films often show that we should be aware of the secrets that documentary makers have. Secondly, both Death to 2020 and No Men Beyond This Point show us that a fake documentary has the ability to inflect around the cultural lines. This is because fake documentaries have an easy appeal to them. You do not need to be a sophisticated viewer to really get them.
It's totally mental. Just one twist after another. They had this sort of election fight happening between a bloke who looked like a ticket inspector on a ghost train and an inflatable orange maniac who didn't seem to be dealing with the plague.
They show you the relevant historical and cultural background so you can comfortably get the basic information up front. In fact, it has been said that fake documentaries are the least expensive, the least respected, and the least complicated films, which kind of makes them the perfect format for parody and satire. And a really interesting and meaningful fact about Death to 2020 is that not a single actor filmed for more than one day.
But it's incredible, really. 73 million Americans witnessing a debate as intellectually stimulating as watching two pigeons fight over a piece of bread in a car lot.
Death to 2020, in addition to offering an emotional outlet for discussion about a difficult and frustrating year, provides us with the satirization of the television formats that we are used to and we contend in our daily lives. It makes them so banal and absurd that the documentary itself suffers as it ceases to be funny.
And this year, pretending to care about climate change was top of the agenda. So they had Greta Thunberg headlining. She's this teenage girl who's become famous, even though everything she says is depressing, kind of like Billie Eilish.
At the same time, Death to 2020 is able to ridicule the use of personal stories and opinions, but also makes a point to focus on the ever-changing views of the alleged experts.
That's not relevant. What is relevant is the total silence from the mainstream media. No one was asking about Hunter Biden anywhere. Like I said on Joe Rogan, what about Hunter Biden? And on Tucker Carlson, what about Hunter Biden? More than once, what about Hunter Biden? Let's hope that evidence arrives in the mail.
That is exactly right.
And I said it in my New York Times bestseller, What About Hunter Biden?
As a result, it is a powerful tool for social and cultural critique of our TV conventions and all the contributing factors that led to misinformation. Now, the documedies and fake documentaries, whichever you prefer, are not really amusing in the usual meaning of the word. One of the main points of criticism against Death to 2020 was that it was simply not funny. It did not make you laugh out loud, and probably at best it only brought a smile to your face every so often. There is no slapstick humor going on, there is no joke count for us to compare. Comically rewarding irony does not come from jokes or from character construction. No flawed planned devices are really employed. A fake documentary such as this one ends up being farcical in nature and perhaps thought-provoking. It merely exposes absurdity, but it is not necessarily creating it.
But others have little to celebrate.
My name is Her Royal Highness Queen Elizabeth I, Part 2.
For the purposes of this recording, you may address me as Your Majesty.
Sir, can you remember where you were when you first heard the news? Your Majesty.
Here, in Buckingham Palace, posing for a banknote portrait. It was proving tedious, so I turned to my portable telephone machine for some light relief. And there, on Meghan's Instagram, the announcement.
In No Man Beyond This Point, the director entertains a what-if scenario and simply plays with potential consequences.
Back then, they were wandering out all the time.
Are you getting him? Just get out of here! Hey, no, shoot!
It's okay.
Now, it is really key to understand that fake documentaries heavily rely on exaggeration and the fact that it prompts self-reflection. It seems that fake mockumentaries highlight total fictionality of some of the plot lines or representations so that the audience can consider and reflect on validity of cultural or political judgments. Some mockumentaries are more thought-provoking than others. However, most tend to be quite compelling to watch because usually mockumentaries tend to have neither positive nor negative attitude to the subject matter. They often remain morally ambivalent towards the topic they contend with. The reason why they are effective at critiquing a social or political phenomenon is because they rely on us, the viewers, being fully immersed in the cultural codes and conventions, while also being mostly oblivious to that very fact.
Speaking of things that are short-lived, the Male Liberation Organization announced today they are ending their hunger strike after only a day and a half.
So in this context, the point of a fake mock documentary is mostly educational. We get to smile with surprise when something we thought was completely obvious is presented to us and subverted. At the end of the day, the point of satire is critique and not humor itself.
Usually when a child is shouting for help, it's best to ignore them in case it's a trap. No less a man than Jeffrey Epstein told me that.